Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, no matter where you are in the world. This is Howie, and I'm here to help you win with money. In this episode of Solving Chaos Gaming, I'm gonna go over some of the battle logs of Splinterlands. Now, this is gonna get really detailed and long, so obviously, if you're watching this video, you must have some interest in this new proposal. So there's a new proposal regarding these R shares or reward shares. They impact how much you get towards these focus chests and also impacts your end of season reward. And what's the issue? So we really got to ask that question first because some people think there's just too many accounts using level 1 cards only. And then the other question is, are these accounts taking too much rewards than they should compared to other accounts? Now, some people think these accounts are bots. While they could be human players also. But we're going to look at the data to figure it out. And this is one of the proposed solutions, is to increase what they consider the minimum level of cards for each league. And then they're going to recalculate the formula based on the level of cards you have. Now, I'm taking this data directly from the link provided. It was posted by Chatter. They did put up 15 days of data, but because I am not going to spend a lot of time building a database and loading everything up, I'm just going to take the data, put it in a spreadsheet, parse it out. So I'm just going to look at a really narrow view of all the data that's out there. Splinterlands provided 15 days of data. I'm only going to look at this 1 hour window. And here's the sample of the data that I did get. So let's get right into this. Okay, so I open up the Excel and you'll see that this first tab is the raw data that it was provided to me. And then what I did was, I'll show you real quickly, the data comes in this type of format. You see the monsters, and then if you scroll down you will see that, and then each team there's a summoner and then the monster for team 2. And to simplify this, all I did was, instead of reconstructing everything, I just parsed them out, and then I created my own data set here. So I do a VLOOKUP. I use the ID from here. You'll see these are the card IDs. This is a starter card, 440. 440 card happens to be a Tarsa, and I can tell that, and then I can parse it out, and then I can basically extract the information that I need. I know what level it is. I know that this is a starter card, a summoner, or a user asset. Is it a gold, that's true or false? And then I can tell how many cards are there being played in that match. There's 6. How many of them are starter cards? So I just parsed it out. Then I just did let me calculate the percentage. So if there's 5 starter cards out of 6, it's 83.3%. And then I use a function to also figure out how many of those cards are level 1. And then I did the percentage here. And then I did that for team 2. So you can see the data here. So what do you do with all this data? You put it into a pivot table. So I'm going to show you that right now. And we'll jump into this real quickly. So the first thing you're going to notice is, let me just collapse the data so you can sort of see it easier. The first thing I want to know was, how close are these numbers between team 1 and team 2? And they're pretty close. So I know that the data is looking pretty good. You can see how many matches there are. There's 123,000 battles in the sample data. And what's interesting is, if you look at this real quickly, what's interesting is, look how many starter summoners are being used currently. According to this, more than half of the battles in this sample data is using starter summoners, and then user asset summoners a little bit less. Now, it's telling you that the formula is working. the R shares rewarded for this type of deck is much smaller. And you can see that about 17 billion R share points went to these type of battles, which is a small percentage. You see that? It's about 11% of the total R shares went into the starter summoners, and 88% went into the user asset summoners. So the first thing I notice is it appears to me that that's by design. That's what you want. And obviously you can drill in if you want to know more information. So that's the way I built this pivot table, so you can sort of see it real quick. And there's really not much to see. You can see how the R shares generally increase as you level up in League. And then you can sort of, I summed it all up so you can see it there. Another way to look at this data, is just to flip this around, sort of like this. And then you'll see that what you notice is a lot of battles are happening in browns and silver. And you can see it by the percentages here. So this is not a big deal. A lot of percentages of battles are happening in browns and silver, but they don't take a lot of R shares. So you look at the browns, it's only about 4.56% of the R shares. Silver is taking up about 39%, and then 30% in 25. So for right now, I'm going to flip it right back. And I think what I want to do is point back out to the first problem that I see. The first problem is if you look at this number here, there are, in this sample set data, there are more battles using starter summoners. Now, the disadvantage of using a starter summoner is you can see that most decks that use a starter summoner will get less R shares, and you can tell by this aggregation over here. But that's the first thing I noticed that's really a big problem. And then as we dive into the data deeper, let's take a look at the next problem. So I'm going to move on to the next tab over here. And let's just collapse the data for right now so we can see it. So let's dive in a little bit further to see what this is telling me. So on this one, I brought in these extra fields. This is the starter. How many starter summoners percentage? Oh no, these are the monster starters. So this is the average starter cards on monster that you have per league. And then I also did it for the average monster level 1 percentage. Now this makes sense. In novice, all your cards are level 1, so I expect those to be 100%. And then the other thing I noticed is Team 1 and Team 2 percentages are fairly close to each other. So I sort of expect that. You know, within 2 or 3 percentage points, it's not going to bother me in a sample set data of 123,000. Now, what we want to do is drill into each league separately. So let's start with the Browns. So here you go. We see how the pivot works. So the first thing we're going to do is look at this row here. What this is telling you is this deck is 100% level 1 deck card. Now in the Browns lead, it's not a big deal. And what this is telling me is 95% of all battles have all level 1 cards. Now in Browns, that's pretty normal. You can do free, up to free 2-2-1. So this is pretty normal, and you can see that the majority of our shares fall into this category, because if you sum this all up, that means 6.6 billion R shares, which falls under here, or if you sum this up, about 98% of all the battles have at least one level 1 card. That's what it's telling me. The only ones that don't are those who fall under this 0 here. Now in Browns, none of this matters. We don't have to analyze it too much. So what I'm going to do is I only started from here so you can see the contrast. So now I'm going to close this one up. Let's go straight to silver now. And then we'll do the same thing. What silver is telling me is there's 45,000 matches. And if you look at the total matches here, 44,000 of them have at least one level 1 card. And if you sum this up, it is telling you the same thing. 98% of battles have at least one. Now, that doesn't matter. What should bother you is if you do something like this. If you look at those with 50% or more, that's what we want to home in on. And that is the first problem you're going to see. In the 100% tile, which means all level 1 cards in silver, there's 33,000 matches. And this is 73%. And if you just look at the top 50, this is a problem. If you just do this, you can see that 89% of matches have more than half the deck of level 1 cards. And if you look at it from an R share point of view, that will be here. That's 44 billion out of the 59 billion. And if you want to look at what that equals to, about 74% of the R shares are going to decks with at least 50% or more that have level 1 cards. Now that doesn't mean much unless you start comparing it to other leagues, so that's what we're going to do next. Let's go into Gold. And in Gold, you're going to see something very similar. You see that? What I care about is how many of them are in here. You see there's not a lot of matches, relatively speaking. There's, well, 22% is still a lot. So this is surprising. So in Go, there's 4,275 matches. But what it's telling you is nearly 1,000 matches, or roughly 22% of them, have all level 1 cards. So if you just look at these, where the deck is half level 1, is 1,771, or from a percentage wise, it's 41%. Now this is surprising. So in Go, there's a lot of cards that are just level 1. And if you look at it from this point of view, if you just ask the question, how many decks have at least one level 1 card? And it's 74%. Now that's normal, because if you're playing a legendary, most people are using a level 1 legendary, or a level 1 fiend, or level 1, right? There's some other use cases where some cards are level 1. Or sometimes when you're building out your deck of your splinters, you only have like 2 or 3 splinters that you're focused on, where you're leveling them up. The rest of them you're keeping at the lowest level possible, because those are not your core splinters that you're using to battle. So there are some times where people sell assets in the other splinters, or they keep at least 1 card so that you don't get penalized for having a starter card. And that explains why sometimes you're having a level 1. So the question is, are there too many R shares going to the people who shouldn't get it? And according to this, I think if you do this, it's showing about 12, nearly 13 billion R shares are going to accounts with at least half the deck are level 1 or higher, right? So that's what it's telling me out of the 45 billion. So that's pretty significant. And if you alter the way these accounts are going to get rewarded a little bit less, and you're going to reward more people over here because they have fewer percentages and their decks have been leveled up, you can see how you're going to shift some of these R shares into some of these type of battles, or at least these accounts that fall under these type of battles. And that is exactly what you want. That's part of what the proposal is. But before we summarize, let's look at the last one. Let's look at Diamond League. And I think Diamond League, you're going to notice something very unusual. 35% of decks are higher than level 1. But if you look at it from this point of view, 64% of decks have at least one level 1. Now again, if you're counting for fiends, if you're counting for cubes, or maybe even a chaos agent that you don't really care about, meat shields or things like that, or just cards that are just there just to take a hit, you're not going to level them up. So you expect some level 1. Now the problem is, let's look at this data. Out of the 1,139 matches, how many of them where half the deck is level 1? And according to this, it's 157. But if you sum it up, it's about 13%, which is really surprising. So in a Diamond League match, 13% of the battles here had at least half the deck were level 1. So this part is surprising. And if you look at these R shares, the total of these R shares is about 6 billion. Which is roughly 15% of those in Diamond League are going to decks that are really undervalued. And so this is really surprising, because the data is telling me it's not just going to impact silver and gold players, it's actually going to impact diamond players also. And another way to view this data is, I have a different view. It's the same thing, but the only difference is the ordering. I just shift the ordering. So here you can sort of see the percentages broken out based on the league. It's the same data that you saw earlier, so you're going to reach the same conclusion. But if you wanted to see where the problematic ones are, really the problematic ones are these, anything I think is like 60% or higher, where 60% of the deck is level 1. This one is saying 75% of the deck is level 1. And this is what the data is telling me. There's definitely some problems here. And again, the data just sorted a little bit different. When you look at it from this point of view, you would think diamond and gold are really not a big impact, and that the biggest impact would be silver and gold. But again, when you look at it from this point of view, you can sort of see what the impact is. And then the last thing I did was, for fun, I wanted to see the summoners. And I really didn't finish this piece of it. There were many other things I could have done, like I didn't bring the win-loss flag in here and stuff like that. But you can see that I have enough data to sort of see a lot. I can break it down by different summoners and which level summoner you're using, whether you're using a starter summoner or not. I can see all that because I have those as an attribute. So what I did was, I probably went a little bit too quick. The good thing is you can pause it, you can go back to my data. But I put it all in the chart, and this is what it looks like. This is saying at least one level 1 card. You can see the percentages. In the browns, it shouldn't surprise you. Silver shouldn't surprise you. What really surprised me was the data that you see in gold and diamond. And then the other part that surprised me is this part. Is the decks where you have at least 50% or more, right? So it's the 50 through 100, which is using level 1. And what's surprising is 13% of all battles in that 1 hour had half the deck or more with level 1 card. And what this is saying in gold is 41% of decks were using half the decks in 41% of the battles had level 1 cards or more. And again, in silver, you expect more level 1 cards, because some people are using level 1 legendary, some people are using level 1 epic monster. So you expect the higher percentages, but again, you notice that it's still pretty high though. So what do you do with all this information? So I'm looking at the proposal again, and the proposal was to use a previous max card deck. So that's how they determine what the minimum is. They got the maximum from the previous and then just moved it up to the next one. Is there a better way to solve this? And it's funny because I look at the ghost card problem as it's still a problem. You can see how many ghost cards are still being used. You can see how many ghost summoners are still being used. And I'm hoping that those are matches where either the player don't have that splinter and that's why they're using it. But I don't know. This is the part that's really hard to say, right? You can look at the data and suggest what you're looking at and see what story it's trying to tell. But I don't know for sure if that's what's really happening. But I do see a lot of summoners or starter cards for summoners. Now, I do believe some of that is because of the bot farms. I do believe it's because there's a lot of accounts out there that are designed to be very cheap and affordable. They were designed to only hold $10 or $20 or $30 worth of cards. And then, because a lot of these bots been around, they were collecting reward cards. And as they keep on playing, the reward cards can get leveled up to level 2 or 3 or 4 without a problem, especially if they're common. And I play in the Bronze League. Again, I know a lot of people don't know me. I don't have a fancy account. I'm not a whale. But even if you play casually, you can still get enough cards to level up to level 2. Level 2 is really not that hard, even collecting reward cards. To get level 3, sure, getting 14 cards, maybe a little bit harder if you don't play much, or if you don't get a lot of daily chests or end of season reward chests. I can see how that gets a little bit harder. But realistically, most people can get level 2, level 3, and that's how this game is designed. Now, what I do think is, could we use a different scale? What if we didn't use these right, using the silver where it's 3, 2, 2, 1? I was thinking, okay, so my silver is exactly the same, but where it's different is, what if we use 4, 3, 2, 2 for the gold, and then for the diamond use 6, 4, 3, 2, and in this way you're not forced to use any max cards, and you're not forced to upgrade fiends if you don't want. Now, even under my even in my matrix here, it's still, if you're using a level 1 fiend, yes, you can use the word penalize, but the way the math works is, yeah, that card you're not going to get the full R shares for that particular card. But I still think it's a better compromise than using these numbers here. Because in gold, you see it's a 5, 4, 3, 2, and I'm saying in gold it should be a little bit lower. You don't want to force people, because ultimately, here's what I think. Bot farms and people who run them are still going to search for the most optimum solution for their time, for their resources, their money. And no matter what you do to change your payout or rewards or whatever, they're still going to figure out what's most optimum to them, and then they're going to structure their bot farm to do that. So even if you use a higher max card or minimum level, there are some bot farms that still they'll hit the minimum, and then what that means is they're going to reap a bigger R share because now they are getting it. Now, they may not be running a 10,000 accounts anymore. It may not make sense for them to run 10,000 accounts. They may reduce that to say, hey, instead of 10, let's just run, let's say, 2,000 accounts. And then you can combine some of those cards and you level them up, and then they'll get more reward. And so my fear is, bot farms, you never will get rid of them. But if you're trying to answer this question of how do you solve it so that those account owners, are they getting too much rewards than the general population? And the answer is they will always will. That's the purpose of a bot farm. You're not running 1 or 2 bots, right? We're not worried about the guy running 1, 2, or 3 bots. What you're worried about is there someone out there who's running bots for 1,000 accounts or 10,000 accounts? And those are the guys who you can design it where you're not using a large account. You can use a $100 account or $50 account, and over time, they will extract more reward than what their account value is. In any case, hey, I'm not here to argue, and again, I'm just a small account player, but I wanted to look at the raw data and I wanted to see what it shows. And I'm really surprised. I am really surprised by the raw data in the spreadsheet. And again, if I have some time, I may load up another hour and see is it very similar. And if it is, it doesn't make sense for me to load up all the files just to prove that point. I may just randomly pick a different hour of the day and see what the data shows me. But anyhow, this is what I have. This is Solving Chaos Gaming. Thank you so much for watching this video.